Comfort zones are often described as safe, familiar, even boring, but boredom alone doesn't explain why leaving them feels quietly difficult. The pull of the comfort zone isn't really about comfort, it's about how the brain decides what is worth the cost.
This video begins by looking at comfort zones not as places of ease, but as systems the mind quietly returns to again and again.
Not dramatic moments, just ordinary routines, familiar paths, and patterns that persist without much attention. At the center of this experience is a simple idea. Familiarity reduces effort, and the brain quietly values that. Predictable environments demand less calculation, less adjustment, and less mental energy to maintain. This is where tension appears. Logic sees possibility while other systems register cost. Seen clearly, comfort zones are not personal failures. They are efficient systems doing exactly what they were built to do. If familiarity is rewarding because it costs less, what does that suggest about the patterns we repeat without noticing? Comfort zones are often described as places we stay because they feel safe or easy. But that explanation doesn't fully capture what's happening. Many comfort zones aren't especially pleasant. Some are repetitive, limiting, or quietly frustrating. And yet, leaving them can feel unusually difficult. This video explores one psychological reason why comfort zones can feel addictive, not in a dramatic sense, but in a subtle, everyday way shaped by how the brain evaluates familiarity, effort, and uncertainty. A comfort zone doesn't always mean comfort. It often means familiarity. Familiar routines, familiar environments, familiar outcomes. Even when these patterns aren't satisfying, they are known. The brain recognizes them, predicts them, and categorizes them as manageable. This familiarity reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the most mentally demanding states the brain encounters. Over time, familiarity itself begins to feel rewarding, not emotionally, but cognitively. This shows up in ordinary life. People remain in routines they've outgrown, environments that no longer stimulate them, or patterns that feel stagnant, not because these situations are ideal, but because they are predictable. The brain already knows how to operate within them. There's no need to calculate new rules, anticipate unfamiliar outcomes, or constantly adjust expectations. What looks like hesitation from the outside often reflects internal efficiency rather than fear. The core psychological insight is this: the brain is biased toward conserving effort. Familiar situations require fewer mental resources to navigate. Over time, this efficiency becomes internally reinforcing. When the brain predicts outcomes accurately, it expends less energy. That reduced effort is registered as a subtle reward. Comfort zones become addictive, not because they feel good emotionally, but because they are cognitively economical. When situations are familiar, fewer variables need attention. Decisions feel quicker. Reactions feel automatic. The brain doesn't need to pause and analyze every step. This creates a sense of mental smoothness. In contrast, unfamiliar situations interrupt this efficiency. They demand focus, recalculation, and constant adjustment. The brain interprets this increased effort as costly. Over repeated experiences, the mind learns a simple equation: familiarity equals lower cost. Predictability allows the brain to simulate outcomes before they happen. When outcomes match expectations, the system feels internally stable. This stability isn't excitement or pleasure, it's the absence of disruption. Over time, that absence becomes preferable. Comfort zones offer this predictability consistently. Even when the outcome is mediocre, it is known. And what is known demands less internal negotiation. Mental energy is limited. The brain continuously balances where to invest it. Familiar environments reduce decision-making, reduce uncertainty, and reduce the need for monitoring. This conservation becomes valuable over time. When faced with change, the brain anticipates higher energy use before any outcome occurs. That anticipation alone can create resistance. The comfort zone remains attractive because it promises efficiency, not because it promises satisfaction.
From a logical perspective, change often appears reasonable. New opportunities, learning, or growth can be intellectually compelling. Logic evaluates long-term potential, but logic operates differently from the systems that manage effort and prediction. While reasoning may recognize benefits, other internal processes focus on immediate cognitive cost. This difference sets the stage for internal conflict. The resistance to leaving a comfort zone isn't always emotional in a dramatic sense. It's often a quiet pull back toward efficiency. The unfamiliar requires constant monitoring. Small uncertainties accumulate. Even when nothing goes wrong, the brain remains alert. This alertness consumes resources. The mind learns to associate unfamiliarity with effort, not danger. That association alone can generate hesitation. Understanding this process doesn't automatically change how it feels. Awareness operates at a reflective level, while effort evaluation happens automatically. Knowing why comfort zones feel attractive doesn't remove the internal cost calculation. The brain may still register unfamiliarity as expensive, even when the reasoning mind sees value in change. This gap between understanding and feeling is part of the experience itself. Seen this way, comfort zones aren't failures of courage or ambition. They are efficient systems the brain has learned to rely on. Their pull reflects optimization, not weakness. The difficulty of leaving them doesn't imply something is wrong. It reveals how strongly the mind values predictability and energy conservation. The experience becomes less personal and more structural, a predictable outcome of how mental systems prioritize effort. When comfort zones are viewed through this lens, their influence appears less mysterious. They persist because they work, not because they inspire, but because they minimize internal cost. This explains why they can feel quietly addictive, not through pleasure, but through efficiency. The mind returns to what it can run smoothly, again and again. If comfort zones are shaped by efficiency rather than comfort, it raises an interesting question. How many familiar patterns persist simply because they cost less to maintain? And how often is resistance to change less about fear and more about effort the brain anticipates spending? These questions don't require answers. They're invitations to notice how familiarity quietly shapes behavior.